Let's bring into the conversation the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Also with us, MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent, host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt. Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you with us here in New York.
It's good to be back.
You're here looking at some of our aging infrastructure. You were in that rail tunnel between New York and New Jersey that was built in 1910, as you said yesterday. It was state-of-the-art 111 years ago.
Exactly.
What did you see yesterday, and how does it fit into the negotiation we've been talking about?
I mean, what you see when you go into this tunnel, and they arranged a kind of technical car that allowed us to get a really good look at it, is a piece of infrastructure that the whole region depends on. An enormous amount of train traffic goes through these tunnels and over those bridges. And it's not just important to this region, it's important to the whole country. The economic consequences, if these tunnels were to go out of service, would be so severe, you would feel it all the way back in Indiana, where I live, economically. And this is just one example of pieces of infrastructure we have across the country. They were built gleaming, state-of-the-art, high-tech, as of whenever they were built. But we're relying on 110-year-old infrastructure in this case. And the longer we try to do that, two things are going to happen. One, the longer we wait, the more it costs to repair. And two, the longer we wait, the more we're flirting with disaster, with some kind of failure that messes everything up. And this is repeated in ways large and small, big cities, small communities, everywhere in the country, which is why this bipartisan infrastructure deal is so needed. It's a good deal. It's a big deal, and the American people want it because, frankly, I mean, I'm doing a lot of this travel and I'm doing a lot of this preaching, but you don't need me to come to a community for people to know that our roads and bridges, and for that matter, our ports and airports, our rail and transit need a lot of work. This is our chance to do it.
And this bipartisan bill, $1.2 trillion, gets at everything you're talking about. Hard infrastructure, rail tunnels like the one you saw yesterday, bridges, roads, highways, all those things.
Plus water and internet. I mean, let's remember that that's critically important, too. I mean, there's always a great American tradition of expanding our sense of infrastructure. It's clear that digital infrastructure is part of that story, which is why the president insisted on having broadband access as part of the deal.
So my question to you then, given all that, is this $1.2 trillion, which in another time would have been an eye-popping number, but appears to be not enough for some people. Is that enough for you as the Secretary of Transportation? Would you like to see this bill passed right away?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at the numbers, you look at the potential here. We're talking about the biggest investment in passenger rail since Amtrak was created. We're talking about the biggest investment in public transit in this country ever. In so many ways, we're doing more than has ever been possible, or more than has been possible in generations. So it's incredibly exciting. And I'll tell you, it's actually going to be a big challenge to implement this. That's going to fall to our department to make sure those dollars are delivered well. But by any measure, this is an extraordinary deal.
So
and
would it be frustrating to you, Mr. Secretary, to see that bipartisan bill slip away because it was linked to the other bill?
Well, let me just say we absolutely want to get this through. We want to get both through because we view them as, in people's lives, these things are linked, right? You don't think about your costs of transportation one month and then the next month you think about the cost of childcare. People are living these things all at the same time. And Congress is dealing with these things all at the same time. But look, we recognize that there are some areas where we can get a lot of Republicans with us, like roads and bridges, and some areas we can't. We're not going to stop being Democrats, right? I mean, we believe that corporations aren't paying their fair share, that these tax breaks for the rich went too far. They believe the opposite. We believe that we need to act with policy to make child care more affordable. They believe the opposite. So be it. Obviously, there's going to be a different breakdown. But you would agree
those are issues that fall outside the purview of the Secretary of Transportation. From where you're concerned, this bipartisan bill needs to pass.
Absolutely. It's critically important, and that's why these negotiations have been so encouraging. I mean, look, there were a lot of twists and turns along the way, and there will be, right? Look, the legislative text still has to come. The votes have to come. There's a lot that has to happen between here and there. But just the fact, I mean, when was the last time you saw Republicans and Democrats on an issue this big walk out of the West Wing and say, we're on the same page?
Joe has a question for you. Joe?
Well, a couple. I mean, so is it the position of you, is it the position of the administration that these bills should not be linked?
Look, we recognize that Congress is going to handle it according to whatever process and sequence makes sense to them. I mean, that's one area where the minority leader is right. The president doesn't dictate congressional processes. Congress does. But what you're going to see is this administration, in a full-throated way, continuing to go to bat for both of these sets of things. The transportation infrastructure that I work on and the related things that are in the bipartisan package, and then the other areas, which by the way, we would love to see Republicans, at least some Republicans, Republicans support that too, because around the country, you don't have to be a Democrat to believe that corporations aren't paying their fair share, to believe that we ought to do more on child care or health care. But we get that there's a different level of support there, and we're going to pursue both.
So what's the administration's current position? Because it's changed, or it seemed to have changed from what Joe Biden said on Saturday, what Cedric Richmond said on Sunday. It was more ambiguous. Do you support the president's statement on Saturday, and is it still the administration's policy that these bills should not be linked? The bipartisan bill should be voted on as a standalone bill?
Yeah, I mean, what we're saying is that both of these are good. The president expects and hopes to sign both.
I know they're both good. Yeah, I know they're both good. But again, the question in Washington, D.C., and the question that has to be answered for Republicans to decide and whether they're going to be part of this Democratic bill or not, or this bipartisan bill, is whether there's linkage. Is there going to be linkage?
I'm not sure it's been clearly defined, other than people who are interested in the process, what that even means, right? I mean, is it going to be linked in the sense of this being one single piece of legislation that moves all at once? No, I don't think it is. Is it going to be linked in terms of different members of Congress care about getting them both done? Of course. Are they linked for us? I mean, they're linked in people's lives. But look, they're going to be different packages. They're going to have a different story. That's why we've been talking about it for quite a while as two tracks.
Right.
I guess not to kill a transportation metaphor, but two tracks are linked in some way, but they're different.
I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it was used perfectly by the Secretary of Transportation. And you answered my question. Nancy Pelosi said they both had to come to the House floor at the same time. You said you don't think that's possible. It's not possible. Thank you for confirming that.
Look, let's be clear. I'm not going to argue with the Speaker, but we get that they're going to move things the way they see fit. We want both of them to get to the president's desk for signature.
And you are right. The minority leader is right. It's not determined by the president. Ultimately, it's determined by the legislature. Let me ask you, while you're in New York City, and I'm sure Willie's going to want to chime in. I don't live there, but I've worked there for 15 years. I've always thought it was a disgrace that the gateway to America was an airport like JFK, where you got in and then it took you an hour and a half to get into the city. I know, I can tell you, Mika and I, there have been many times we've had to make a choice between going to Washington or going to New York to do a show. And we will choose Washington because we know we can land and we can be in the city doing business in less than an hour and a half. Why is it so hard? Why is New York's infrastructure so horrific? Why are the airports so horrific? Why is the gateway to America? And this is where it really does. It doesn't affect me. I'm not a New Yorker, but it affects me as an American that the gateway to America is JFK for the most part. And the infrastructure to get from JFK to the city is just absolutely dismal.
Right. So if you book me for about 3 hours, I can walk you through some really convoluted. It's actually important if nerdy.
We have 3 hours.
We've got time.
All right, great. So here we go. The way that our funding works, it breaks up transit from aviation funding in a way that's different from pretty much any other country, where you usually have a seamless experience, right? You get off the plane, you get into some kind of train or public transportation, you're downtown relatively quickly. That doesn't happen in most big cities in the U.S., and it largely has to do with some things that I think we could eventually address as a matter of policy. But it also has to do with the fact that we as a country have not been prepared to invest in what it takes to have world-class infrastructure. And you're right, as an American, it's embarrassing sometimes to see the standard that citizens of other countries around the world get to take for granted. And that American citizens can't expect, especially when it comes to linkages involving public transit, rail. This is a chance to do something about that. I mean, when we're talking about the historic levels of dollars going into transit and rail, and then we've got to be smarter about connecting those up to our airports and improving the airports ourselves. One of the least controversial parts of this bill was putting $25 billion into that kind of infrastructure. We've got to level up in this country.